Where did the beings that the ancient Sumerians called their gods come from? What if thousands of years ago, visitors from the distant depths of space truly arrived on our planet, and their presence forever changed the course of human history? Consider for a moment how strange this idea sounds to a modern person raised on textbooks where everything has a rational explanation. But what if those textbooks told us only part of the story, the convenient and comfortable part, leaving out the mysteries that don't fit the familiar picture of the world? We were always told that civilization was born in the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia approximately 6,000 years ago, that humanity traveled a long road from primitive hunter-gatherers to farmers, and then to builders of the first cities. We were taught that the gods of ancient peoples were merely the fruit of imagination, an attempt to explain incomprehensible natural phenomena, projections of human fears and hopes onto the celestial vault. But a series of remarkable discoveries in recent decades forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about our past. Ancient texts, carved onto clay tablets in cuneiform, tell a story that sounds like science fiction, yet contain details so precise that modern scholars cannot explain how their authors could have known such things. Today we will plunge into one of the most mysterious myths of humanity, the myth of the Anunnaki, beings who, according to Sumerian tradition, descended from the heavens to the earth in time immemorial. We will examine ancient texts that describe them with astonishing detail. We will study the astronomical knowledge of the Sumerians, which should not have existed in that era. And we will try to understand what Nibiru is, the mysterious planet that modern science alternately denies and then searches for again at the edges of our solar system. Welcome to this nocturnal journey through the labyrinths of ancient history. Here, on our channel, we explore those corners of the past that official science rarely visits, those mysteries that make us doubt whether we truly know everything about our origins. Make yourself comfortable. Allow your mind to free itself from habitual frameworks, because what we are going to discuss tonight requires openness and a willingness to accept the possibility that reality may prove far more remarkable than it seemed. If you enjoy exploring the boundaries of the known, if you value stories that make you think, stay with us until the end of this journey. Let us begin with what is known to anyone who has taken even a passing interest in ancient history. Sumerian civilization arose in southern Mesopotamia, in the territory of modern Iraq, approximately in the 4th millennium BCE. It was a genuine explosion of culture and technology, the appearance of which continues to spark debate among historians. In literally a few centuries, nomadic tribes that had neither writing nor complex social structures were transformed into creators of the first cities, inventors of the wheel, developers of a sophisticated irrigation system, and authors of the world's first writing. The Sumerians built magnificent ziggurats, step temple towers that rose above the plains like man-made mountains. They created the first law codes, developed a mathematical system based on the number 60, which we still use today when measuring time and angles. They observed the stars with such precision that their astronomical records astonish modern scholars. But here's what is strange. The Sumerians themselves never claimed credit for these achievements. In their myths, recorded on thousands of clay tablets that archaeologists discovered in the ruins of ancient libraries, the same story repeats again and again. Everything that people possess was given to them by the gods, beings who came from the heavens and taught primitive humanity the foundations of civilization. These beings were called the Anunnaki, which in literal translation means those who came from the heavens to the earth. Not gods in the conventional sense of that word, not abstract spirits of nature, but specifically beings who descended from somewhere above. For a long time, scholars treated these myths the same way they treated all other ancient legends, as beautiful tales reflecting the primitive worldview of ancient peoples. But in the middle of the 20th century, everything changed when researchers began reading Sumerian texts more carefully and found in them details that did not fit the image of fantasies from a primitive people. It all began with the discoveries of Zecharia Sitchin, an American researcher who spent a decade studying Sumerian texts in the original. What he found turned conventional understanding of ancient mythology on its head. According to his translations, the Anunnaki were not mythological gods, but representatives of an advanced extraterrestrial civilization who arrived on Earth from the planet Nibiru. This planet, according to Sumerian texts, moves in a highly elongated orbit around the Sun, approaching the inner regions of our solar system only once every 3,600 years. For most of its time, Nibiru is so far from the Sun that it is impossible to see from Earth, which explains why modern telescopes have still not been able to detect it. It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But let us think for a moment about where the Sumerians could have gotten such ideas. We are talking about a civilization that existed more than 4,000 years ago. People who had no telescopes, no space probes, or even a basic understanding of the laws of physics in our modern sense. And yet their cosmological model contains elements that are strikingly accurate. The Sumerians knew that the Earth and other planets orbit the Sun. This knowledge was lost for a millennium and rediscovered only in the 16th century by Nicholas Copernicus. They knew of the existence of Uranus and Neptune, planets invisible to the naked eye and officially discovered only in the 18th and 19th centuries, respectively. On one of the Sumerian cylinder seals, known as the VA243 seal, a model of the solar system is depicted with the Sun at the center and 11 bodies surrounding it. 11, not 8, as in our modern model. The 10th body, according to Sitchin's interpretation, is Nibiru itself. Of course, official science regards Sitchin's work with skepticism. Many Assyriologists criticize his translations, claiming he made serious errors in interpreting cuneiform signs. They point out that the word Anunnaki has a far more prosaic meaning and refers simply to a group of deities in the Sumerian pantheon. The VA243 seal, in their view, does not depict the solar system at all, but some other astronomical or religious symbol. But here is what is interesting. Even if we discard all of Sitchin's interpretations and consider only what official science acknowledges, the Sumerian texts remain a mystery. They do genuinely describe the arrival of gods from the heavens. They do contain astonishingly accurate astronomical knowledge. They do tell of the creation of man by the gods through some process that suspiciously resembles genetic engineering. And they do mention a celestial body we cannot identify with any known planet. Let us plunge deeper into these texts and see what exactly they tell us. One of the primary sources of information about the Anunnaki is the Enigma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth based on older Sumerian traditions. This text describes a cosmic catastrophe that shaped our solar system. According to the epic, in ancient times there existed a planet called Tiamat, located between Mars and Jupiter. Nibiru, arriving from the depths of space, collided with Tiamat and shattered it into two pieces. One piece became the asteroid belt, and the other was cast into a new orbit and became the Earth. Modern astronomers do indeed ask questions about the origin of the asteroid belt. There is a hypothesis according to which it is the remains of a planet that never formed or was destroyed in the early stages of the solar system's development. The coincidence with the Sumerian myth is possible, but there are too many such coincidences to simply ignore. Now let us talk about the Anunnaki themselves. Who were they according to the Sumerian texts? They were not ephemeral spirits or abstract forces of nature. The texts describe them as physical beings of flesh and blood, subject to emotions, illness, and even death, though their lifespan was immeasurably longer than a human one. They ate, drank, fell in love, quarreled, and made war upon each other. They had a complex social hierarchy headed by Anu, the supreme ruler, and his sons Enlil and Enki, who played key roles in managing affairs on Earth. According to the texts, the Anunnaki came to Earth with a specific purpose. They were searching for gold, not for ornamentation or trade, but for technical needs. Sumerian texts assert that Nibiru's atmosphere had begun to deteriorate, and to restore it required the finest particles of gold which could be dispersed into the upper atmospheric layers. It sounds fantastic. Perhaps, but modern science does indeed confirm that microscopic gold particles can reflect infrared radiation and could theoretically be used to manage a planet's climate. Such geoengineering ideas are discussed by scientists today in the context of combating global warming. Initially, the Anunnaki mined gold themselves, laboring in mines in a territory they called Abzu in modern-day southern Africa. But the work was hard, and over time the rank-and-file Anunnaki mutinied, refusing to continue this exhausting labor. And then, according to the texts, a decision was made to create a labor force of beings who could perform the heavy work in place of the gods. Thus, according to Sumerian mythology, humanity was created. The text known as the Atrahasis describes this process in detail. Enki, the god of wisdom and lord of the waters, together with the goddess Ninhursag, conducted experiments mixing clay with the blood and flesh of a slain god. After several failed attempts that produced deformed and non-viable creatures, they finally succeeded in creating the ideal worker, the human. It is noteworthy that the first people in these texts are described as incapable of reproducing independently. They were created in batches as artificial beings. Only later were they granted the capacity for reproduction. If these texts are read literally, they describe a process we would today call genetic engineering, the mixing of genetic material of one species with another to create a new organism. Clay, in this context, may be a metaphor for basic biological material, and the blood and flesh of the god the source of the genes that made man a rational being. Of course, this is an interpretation, but it explains many mysteries of human evolution that still lack convincing scientific explanation. Take, for example, the problem of the missing link. Evolutionary biology still cannot fully explain how primitive hominids became Homo sapiens. The transition occurred astonishingly quickly by evolutionary standards and was accompanied by changes difficult to explain through natural selection alone. The volume of the human brain increased disproportionately fast. Complex cognitive abilities appeared that had no obvious evolutionary advantage in the initial stage. Humans lost most of their body hair, which made them vulnerable in the wild. These and many other features leads some researchers to suppose that there was some external intervention in our evolution. There is yet another curious aspect. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki not only created man, but actively participated in the development of human civilization. They taught people agriculture, construction, metallurgy, writing, astronomy, and mathematics. They gave laws and established social order. The first kings, according to Sumerian tradition, received their power directly from the gods who descended from the heavens to grant them the right to rule. This explains the mystery of the sudden flowering of Sumerian civilization. Why did primitive tribes suddenly begin building cities, writing laws, and observing the stars? Traditional history assumes gradual development, but the archaeological evidence shows an entirely different picture. Sumerian civilization appears practically from nowhere, already fully formed with all its achievements, as if someone had handed them ready-made knowledge. But where did the Anunnaki themselves come from? Here we return to Nibiru, the mysterious planet that is the key to this entire story. Sumerian texts describe Nibiru as a wandering planet, moving in a highly elongated, elliptical orbit. For most of its orbital period, it lies beyond the bounds of the solar system we know, in the cold depths of space. But once every 3,600 years, it approaches the Sun, passing through the inner regions of the solar system and causing cataclysms on the planets it passes by. Interestingly, modern astronomy does not exclude the possibility of such an object's existence. In recent years, scientists have actively discussed the hypothesis of Planet X, or the ninth planet, a massive celestial body that must exist at the edges of the solar system to explain the anomalies in the orbits of trans-Neptunian objects. Calculations show that this hypothetical planet should be several times more massive than Earth and move in a highly elongated orbit with a period of thousands or even tens of thousands of years. It resembles the description of Nibiru, doesn't it? Of course, official science does not link the hypothesis of the ninth planet with Sumerian myths. That would be too bold a step for the academic community. But the coincidence is striking. Ancient Sumerians described a planet whose existence modern astronomers predict on the basis of mathematical calculations. How could they have known this 4,000 years ago? Some skeptics claim it is merely a coincidental match. Others suppose the Sumerians simply had rich imaginations and invented a story that happened to resemble reality. But the deeper we plunge into Sumerian texts, the more such coincidences we find. Too many to chalk up to chance. Let us now turn to what can be touched with the hands, the archaeological evidence that makes researchers the world over ask uncomfortable questions. Because myths remain myths until we find their material confirmation. And in the case of the story of the Anunnaki, there turns out to be a surprisingly large amount of such confirmation. Let us start with the most obvious, the Sumerian ziggurats, those step temple towers that rose above the ancient cities of Mesopotamia. The most famous of them, the ziggurat of Ur, even in its half-ruined state, produces a colossal impression. Imagine a structure more than 20 meters tall, built from millions of bricks, with perfectly flat faces and precise orientation to the cardinal directions. This was built by people who, according to official history, had only just emerged from the Neolithic. People who had neither cranes, nor precise measuring instruments, nor even iron tools. But the ziggurat is merely the tip of the iceberg. Throughout the territory of ancient Mesopotamia, archaeologists find artifacts that do not fit our understanding of the technological capabilities of that time. Take, for example, the so-called Baghdad battery, a clay vessel with a copper cylinder and iron rod inside. Experiments have shown that when this vessel is filled with an acid such as vinegar or grape juice, it begins to generate an electric current. Why would ancient Sumerians need electricity? Official science supposes these devices were used for electroplating metals. But how could an ancient people have come to possess knowledge of electrochemistry? Even more mysterious are the Sumerian cylinder seals, small stone cylinders with images carved into them. When such a seal is rolled across wet clay, it leaves an impression with incredibly detailed scenes. On these seals we see images of gods, mythological creatures, and ritual scenes. But among them appear images that provoke thought. On some seals, figures are shown in strange garments resembling spacesuits or protective costumes. On others, one can see winged beings rising into the sky on some kind of flying craft. And the famous VA243 seal contains what many researchers interpret as a diagram of the solar system with an additional planet. Critics say we see what we want to see, that ancient artists simply depicted their gods in ceremonial robes, and we interpret this through the lens of our technological culture. Perhaps. But how then do we explain images in which these beings hold objects suspiciously resembling modern technical devices, or scenes where people stand before gods in poses strikingly reminiscent of modern medical procedures? Deserving special attention is the Temple of Enki in Eridu, the most ancient city of the Sumerians, considered the place where the gods first set foot on earth. Excavations of this temple revealed layers reaching back more than 7,000 years. In the deepest layers, archaeologists discovered traces of strange rituals involving the use of substances not found in the natural environment of this region. Where they were brought from and how they were used remains a mystery. But let us step beyond the borders of Mesopotamia. If the story of the Anunnaki has a real basis, we should find traces of their presence in other parts of the world too. And what do we find? Remarkable parallels in the myths and archaeological finds of cultures that, according to official history, had no contact with one another whatsoever. In southern Africa, in a region that Sumerian texts call Abzu, the place where the Anunnaki mined gold, there exist ancient mines whose age is estimated at 100,000 years and more. Yes, you heard that correctly. 100,000 years. This was a time when modern humans, according to official theory, were only beginning to spread across the African continent. Who was mining gold in these shafts? Official archaeology has no answer to this question. In the same region, researcher Michael Tellinger discovered thousands of strange stone circles covering an enormous territory. When studied from the air, it emerged that these circles form complex geometric patterns and are connected to one another by canals and roads. The age of some of these structures is estimated at 200,000 years. Tellinger believes these are the remains of an ancient city connected with gold mining, a city built long before the appearance of the earliest civilizations known to us. But let us return to the astronomical knowledge of the Sumerians, because it is here that we find the most compelling evidence that they possessed information they could not have obtained independently. The Sumerians knew about the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, whose full cycle takes approximately 26,000 years. This phenomenon cannot be detected in the course of a single human lifetime. To determine it requires observations continuing over many generations and complex mathematical calculations. How could the Sumerians have known about this? They divided the celestial sphere into 12 zodiac constellations and knew that the sun passes through each of them in approximately 2,160 years. They understood that the Earth was a sphere and knew its approximate dimensions. They compiled detailed star catalogs and could predict eclipses with astonishing accuracy. But most mysterious of all is their knowledge of the outer planets of the solar system. Sumerian texts describe Uranus as a blue-green planet of watery nature. Neptune is characterized as watery and misty. These descriptions are remarkably accurate, but how could the Sumerians have composed them without telescopes? Uranus was discovered only in 1781 by William Herschel. Neptune later still in 1846. Before the invention of powerful telescopes, these planets were completely invisible from Earth. The only logical explanation is that someone passed this knowledge on to the Sumerians, someone who had seen these planets with their own eyes or possessed technology for observing them, and that someone, according to the Sumerians themselves, was the Anunnaki. Now let us turn to the geological evidence, because if Nibiru truly exists and periodically passes through the inner regions of the solar system, this should have left traces on Earth and on other planets, and such traces do indeed exist. The geological history of our planet is marked by a series of catastrophic events occurring with a certain periodicity: mass extinctions, sharp climate changes, reversals of the magnetic field, periodic floods of global scale. Some researchers suggest these events are connected to the gravitational influence of a large celestial body periodically approaching the Earth. Of particular interest is the so-called Great Flood, the memory of which has been preserved in the myths of virtually every people on Earth. The Sumerian version of this myth, known as the Epic of Gilgamesh, is the oldest known to us. It tells how the gods decided to destroy humanity with a flood. But one of them, Enki, warned his faithful follower Utnapishtim and helped him build a vessel on which he saved his family and specimens of all living creatures. Geological data confirms that approximately 12,000 years ago, a global catastrophe occurred that caused rapid glacial melting and a significant rise in ocean levels. This event, known as the end of the last ice age, destroyed many coastal settlements and could have remained in the memory of survivors as a universal flood. But what caused this catastrophe? Official science speaks of natural climatic cycles, but some researchers suggest the trigger may have been the close passage of a massive celestial body whose gravity caused tectonic activity, glacial melting, and a change in the Earth's axial tilt. A celestial body the Sumerians called Nibiru. There is yet another curious fact. Sumerian texts claim that the Anunnaki knew of the approaching flood in advance and took measures for their own salvation. They rose into the sky on their flying craft and waited out the catastrophe in orbit, watching the destruction of humanity from above. After the waters receded, they returned to Earth and helped the surviving people rebuild civilization. This account explains why the first post-Diluvian civilizations, Sumer and Egypt, arose practically simultaneously and already possessed advanced technologies and knowledge. Speaking of Egypt, we cannot fail to mention the remarkable parallels between Sumerian and Egyptian mythology. The Egyptians also believed their civilization was created by gods who descended from the heavens. They called them the Neteru and described them very similarly to how the Sumerians described the Anunnaki. The Nibiru were likewise physical beings possessing supernatural abilities and technologies inaccessible to ordinary mortals. The Egyptian pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, represent yet another mystery that has no satisfactory explanation. How could people of the Bronze Age have built a structure of such precision and complexity? The Great Pyramid consists of more than 2 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. The blocks are fitted to one another with a precision down to fractions of a millimeter. The faces of the pyramid are oriented to the cardinal directions with an error of less than 1 degree. Inside the pyramid, there are chambers and passages positioned at angles precisely corresponding to the position of certain stars at a certain epoch. Modern engineers acknowledge that replicating such construction would be extremely difficult even with modern technology. Official Egyptology asserts that the pyramids were built by slaves using simple tools, copper chisels, wooden wedges, and human muscle. But experiments show that such methods cannot achieve the precision we observe. The alternative hypothesis supposes that the pyramid builders possessed technologies we know nothing about, technologies that may have been passed to them by those very gods who, according to Egyptian texts, ruled Egypt in antediluvian times. The Turin Papyrus, an ancient Egyptian document, contains a list of kings who ruled Egypt over millennia. The first kings on this list are named gods and demigods, and their reigns are measured in thousands of years. Only afterward does the era of human pharaohs begin. Similar myths are found among the peoples of India. The Vedas, the most ancient sacred texts of Hinduism, describe gods who flew in vimanas, celestial chariots, and waged wars using weapons suspiciously resembling nuclear ones. The Mahabharata describes battles in which weapons were used that emitted blinding light and destroyed entire armies, after which survivors lost their hair and nails, and the water became poisoned. These descriptions correspond strikingly precisely to the consequences of a nuclear explosion. In South America, the Inca believed their civilization was founded by the god Viracocha, who came from across the sea after a great flood and taught the people everything they knew. Viracocha was described as a tall, fair-skinned, bearded man, nothing like the indigenous inhabitants of the Andes. After completing his mission, he departed westward across the ocean, promising to return. The Maya awaited the return of Kukulkan. The Aztecs awaited Quetzalcoatl. Both names mean feathered serpent. This god was likewise described as differing from the local population and likewise promised to return. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Mexico, the Aztecs initially took them for the returning gods, which largely predetermined their swift defeat. All these myths tell the same story, merely in different variations. Gods came from the heavens or from across the sea. They brought knowledge and technology. They taught people civilization, and then they left, promising to return. If these gods were the Anunnaki, as the Sumerian version supposes, then it follows that they visited not only Mesopotamia, but other regions of the world as well, everywhere leaving behind them the seeds of civilization. This explains one of the greatest mysteries of history, the so-called problem of parallel development. Why do civilizations that arose independently in different parts of the world share so many common features? Why are the Egyptian pyramids so similar to the Mesoamerican ones? Why is the Sumerian zodiac practically identical to the Chinese one? Why do flood myths appear in cultures separated by oceans? Traditional history has no convincing answer to these questions. But if all these civilizations were created or guided by the same beings, the parallels become understandable. Let us now return to the question of Nibiru. If this planet exists and truly approaches the Earth once every 3,600 years, when can we expect its next appearance? Sumerian texts give no precise answer to this question, but some researchers have attempted to calculate the date of the last passage and consequently the time of the next. According to one version, Nibiru last passed through the inner solar system approximately in the 6th century BCE, an era of great transformations when Buddha, Confucius, Zarathustra, and Greek philosophers appeared simultaneously in different parts of the world. This was the time that German philosopher Karl Jaspers called the axial age of humanity, a period of unprecedented spiritual and intellectual awakening. Coincidence, or the influence of an approaching planet and possible contact with its inhabitants? If this version is correct, the next approach of Nibiru should occur in approximately 3,000 years. But there are other calculations that give closer dates. Some researchers connect the passage of Nibiru with the end of the Mayan calendar in 2012. As we know, no catastrophe occurred at that time, and so perhaps the periodicity was calculated incorrectly, or the effects of the passage proved less dramatic than expected. It is important to understand that we do not know precisely how the presence of a massive celestial body should affect the Earth. This depends on many factors, including the distance of passage, the mass of the object, and the speed of its movement. Perhaps not every passage of Nibiru causes global catastrophes. Perhaps some passages go almost unnoticed, while others lead to large-scale changes. This would explain why the geological history of the Earth is marked by catastrophes at irregular intervals. Now let us turn to the most human of all sources of knowledge, the memory of our ancestors preserved in myths, legends, and sacred texts. Because stones may fall silent and geological layers reveal their secrets only to specialists. But the stories that people tell one another from generation to generation carry within them information that cannot be erased or hidden. And when we begin to compare these stories, a picture emerges so consistent and detailed that ascribing it to random coincidence becomes ever harder. Sumerian texts contain an astonishingly detailed genealogy of the Anunnaki, their family connections, conflicts, alliances, and betrayals. These are not abstract deities, but specific individuals with their own characters, motivations, and interwoven histories. At the head of the pantheon stood Anu, king of Nibiru, who rarely visited Earth in person, preferring to manage affairs from his home planet. His sons Enlil and Enki divided authority over earthly territories between themselves and constantly rivaled one another. Enlil, the firstborn, was given command of the mission on Earth and control over the northern territories, including Mesopotamia. He was strict, demanding, and treated people as inferior beings created solely to serve the gods. Enki, the younger son but born of a more noble mother, was given control of the southern territories, including Africa and its gold mines. Unlike his brother, Enki displayed sympathy and compassion toward humans. It was he, according to the texts, who was the architect of humanity. It was he who warned Utnapishtim of the flood, defying Enlil's orders to keep the catastrophe secret. This conflict between the two brothers runs as a red thread through all of Sumerian mythology and is reflected in later religious traditions. Some researchers see in it the prototype of the confrontation between a good and an evil God that we find in Zoroastrianism and later in the Christian concept of God and Satan. Enki, who grants people knowledge and saves them from destruction, remarkably resembles the biblical serpent who gave Eve the fruit of the tree of knowledge, or Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods for humanity's sake. Female deities played no less important a role in this system. Ninhursag, the sister of Enlil and Enki, was the chief geneticist directly involved in the creation of man. Her title, Mother of Gods and Humans, points to her role as the progenitor of both species. Inanna, or Ishtar, in the later Akkadian tradition, was the goddess of love and war, daughter of the moon god Sin, and granddaughter of Enlil. She was one of the most active deities, constantly intervening in human affairs, falling in love with mortal heroes, and instigating wars to expand her domains. The story of Inanna's descent into the underworld is one of the most ancient mythological subjects, prefiguring the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. According to the Sumerian text, Inanna descended to the realm of the dead to visit her sister Ereshkigal, but was killed and hung for 3 days on a hook like a corpse until she was revived on Enki's orders. This motif of death and resurrection after 3 days subsequently appears in many religious traditions, including Christianity. But what is particularly interesting in the Sumerian texts is the description of the technologies the gods used. They flew in what the texts call heavenly boats or thunderbirds. They used weapons capable of destroying cities and incinerating entire armies. They communicated with each other over distances using some kind of devices. They could determine the sex of a future child and even alter it. They possessed the art of reviving the dead, or at least significantly prolonging life. One text describes a mission control center called Duranki, bond of heaven and earth, located in the city of Nippur. There stood the Dirga, a dark chamber where the gods could see everything happening on earth. It sounds like a description of a satellite or drone surveillance center. There also were kept the tablets of destiny, containing all the knowledge and programs for managing the earthly mission. Whoever held these tablets possessed supreme authority, and fierce wars were fought over them among the gods. The story of the theft of the tablets of destiny by the god Zu tells of an attempted seizure of power that was suppressed by deities loyal to Enlil. Zu was defeated and executed, and the tablets returned to their place. This episode shows that even among the gods there existed conflicts and struggles for power, that they were far from the omniscience and omnipotence attributed to deities in later monotheistic religions. It is noteworthy that the Sumerian gods were mortal. Yes, their lifespan was measured in thousands of years by earthly reckoning, but they could be killed, and indeed did die. The god Dumuzi, the beloved of Inanna, was killed and sent to the underworld. The god whose blood and flesh were used to create the first man was specifically put to death for this purpose. This mortality of the gods radically distinguishes Sumerian theology from later religions, where the god or gods are eternal and invulnerable. But it fits perfectly into the concept of extraterrestrial beings who, for all their technological superiority, remained biological organisms. Now let us ask an important question. If the Anunnaki truly existed and actively intervened in human affairs, where did they go? Why did the contact end? Sumerian texts provide a partial answer to this. According to them, at some point, the gods decided to step back from direct governance of the earth and transfer power to human rulers. Kingship was lowered from heaven, the texts say, and the first dynasties of human kings ruled in the name of the gods, fulfilling their will. This was not a sudden disappearance. The gods continued to appear from time to time, giving instructions, rendering judgment, rewarding and punishing. But their presence became ever rarer. By the end of the Sumerian era, around 2000 BCE, contacts had practically ceased. The gods departed, leaving behind temples, statues, and priests maintaining rituals in hope of their return. Some researchers suppose that the departure of the Anunnaki was connected with the passage of Nibiru. When their home planet approached the Earth, they returned home, leaving humanity to its own devices. Others believe the departure was a gradual decision linked to the fact that the earthly gold mining mission was completed and continued presence became unnecessary. A third group supposes that a schism occurred among the Anunnaki themselves, and some of them remained on Earth, mixing with humans and founding lineages of demigods and heroes, the memory of whom is preserved in the myths of all peoples. The biblical book of Genesis contains a mysterious passage about the sons of God who saw that the daughters of man were beautiful and took them as wives. From these unions were born giants, mighty men of old. The Hebrew tradition calls these beings Nephilim, which literally means those who fell or descended. The connection with the Sumerian Anunnaki, those who descended from the heavens, is obvious. The apocryphal Book of Enoch, not included in the biblical canon but venerated in the Ethiopian Church, provides a far more detailed account of these events. According to it, 200 angels called Watchers descended to Mount Hermon and took wives from among humans. They taught people forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, weapon-making, cosmetics, astrology, magic. For this violation of heavenly law, they were punished by God, and their giant offspring were destroyed by the flood. Remarkably, this story echoes the Sumerian texts. The same motifs. Gods descend from the heavens, take earthly women as wives, pass technologies and knowledge to humanity, and then follows a catastrophe that destroys the results of this mixing. But in the biblical version, these actions are presented as sin, a violation of divine order, whereas the Sumerian texts describe the creation of man as an intentional project approved by the highest gods. This difference in interpretation may reflect changing attitudes toward contact between gods and humans over time. What was originally perceived as a boon granted by generous gods became in later traditions something presented as forbidden knowledge received from fallen angels. Perhaps priests of later eras, lacking direct contact with the gods, reinterpreted the ancient stories in a negative light to explain why the gods no longer appeared to people. An interesting parallel is found in Greek mythology. The Titans, the older generation of gods, were overthrown by the Olympians and imprisoned in Tartarus. But some Titans, such as Prometheus, sided with humans against the Olympians and were cruelly punished for it. Prometheus, who gave people fire and taught them crafts, was chained to a rock where an eagle daily ate his liver. His name literally means foresight or forethought, which recalls Enki, the god of wisdom who also foresaw the flood and saved humanity. These parallels between Sumerian, biblical, and Greek traditions suggest that at their core lies a common source, a memory of real events that was interpreted differently by different peoples. If the Anunnaki truly existed and contacted humans in different parts of the world, it is natural to expect that memory of them would be preserved in the myths of different cultures, adapted to local traditions and beliefs. Let us now consider the question that inevitably arises after everything that has been said. If the Anunnaki existed, if they truly created us and governed us over millennia, will they return? And if so, when? The Sumerian texts give an ambiguous answer to this question. They speak of the return of Nibiru, but give no precise date. They describe ages when the gods were near and ages when they withdrew, but do not explain what determines this cycle. Some researchers have tried to calculate the time of Nibiru's next approach based on a period of 3,600 years. However, these calculations yield very different results depending on which point one takes as the starting reference. If the last approach occurred around 1500 BCE, the next should happen around the present era. If it occurred around the 6th century BCE, we can expect it around the year 3000. And if we believe certain interpretations of the Mayan calendar, the passage should already have taken place. But perhaps we are misunderstanding the mechanisms of these contacts. Perhaps the Anunnaki are not strictly bound to the orbital period of Nibiru. If they possess interstellar travel technology, they could appear at any moment, regardless of their home planet's position. Perhaps they never fully left the Earth, but merely withdrew into the shadows, observing us from places we have not yet reached. There is a hypothesis according to which the Anunnaki or their descendants are still present on Earth, hiding from humanity and managing world events from behind the scenes. This idea lies at the foundation of many conspiracy theories about a secret world government, ancient bloodlines, and hidden elites. It is hard to judge the credibility of such theories, but their very popularity points to a deeply rooted human feeling that someone invisible is controlling our fate. There is another possibility, a more troubling one. What if the Anunnaki return not as benefactors but as masters, coming to inspect their property? The Sumerian texts do not depict them as unambiguously benevolent beings. They used humans as a labor force. They waged wars among themselves with no concern for human casualties. They very nearly destroyed all of humanity with a flood. If such beings return to an Earth that has developed nuclear weapons and space technologies, how would they respond? Would they be pleased to see their creations grow up and become independent? Or would they consider us a threat to be neutralized? These questions may seem like idle speculation, but they have practical significance. If we were truly created by a more advanced civilization, our relationship to our own place in the universe must change. We can no longer consider ourselves the crown of creation, the only intelligent beings in the cosmos. We must acknowledge that we are part of a broader cosmic family, with all the obligations and dangers that follow from this. And perhaps the most important question is not whether the Anunnaki will return, but whether we are ready for that meeting. In the millennia that have passed since their departure, humanity has traveled a long road. We have mastered technologies our ancestors could only dream of. We have gone into space, split the atom, decoded the genome. But have we grown wiser? Have we learned to live in peace with one another? Have we overcome the greed, aggression, and ignorance that so often define our behavior? If the Anunnaki are watching us from their distant home, what do they see? Do they see a civilization worthy of being called their heirs? Or do they see children who never grew up, playing with dangerous toys and risking the destruction of themselves and their planet? These reflections lead us to the philosophical dimension of this entire story. Regardless of whether we believe in the Anunnaki or not, The very idea that we may have been created by superior beings makes us think about the fundamental questions of our existence. Who are we? Where did we come from? What are we here for? People have asked themselves these questions since time immemorial, and we still have no definitive answers. Traditional religions say we were created by God in His image and likeness. Science says we are a product of blind evolution, a random result of billions of years of natural selection. The ancient astronaut theory offers a third path. We were created by an advanced but not omnipotent civilization that is itself part of the natural universe. In this model, there is no room for the supernatural, but there is room for wonder, the wonder of life, of reason, of consciousness spreading through the cosmos from star to star, from planet to planet. If the Anunnaki created us, this does not diminish our dignity. On the contrary, it means we are part of a great cosmic story, heirs to a tradition stretching into the depths of time and space. It means that reason in the universe is not alone, that somewhere out there among the stars are other beings asking the same questions, seeking the same answers. That is a comforting thought in the cold infinity of the cosmos. But it also means responsibility. If we were created with a certain purpose, we must try to understand that purpose and decide whether we wish to follow it. If we carry within us the genes of a more advanced civilization, we must strive to realize that potential to become worthy of our inheritance. If our creators one day return, we must be ready to meet them as equals, not as slaves. Perhaps this is precisely the meaning of all the trials that humanity has passed through in its history. Wars, epidemics, catastrophes, but also discoveries, achievements, moments of incredible beauty and heroism. All of this was our examination, a test of whether we are capable of growing from the role of creations into creators ourselves, whether we are capable of one day setting out for the stars and perhaps finding our creators there, or becoming creators for other worlds. This thought takes the breath away. It transforms the story of the Anunnaki from an ancient myth into a guide to action, from a mystery of the past into a vision of the future. Regardless of whether the Anunnaki were real beings or the fruit of ancient Sumerian imagination, the ideas embedded in their stories hold deep meaning for us today. We live in an era of great transformation. Technology is developing at incredible speed. We are beginning to reach beyond our planet, at first tentatively, then with ever greater boldness. We ask questions about life on other worlds and search for signals from extraterrestrial civilizations. We edit the genome and create artificial intelligence. We ourselves are becoming gods, capable of creating life and altering reality. Perhaps this is our destiny. Perhaps the Anunnaki created us precisely for this, so that one day we would take their place and continue the great relay race of reason through the universe. Perhaps when we finally reach the stars, we will discover that our creators are waiting for us there, ready to receive us as equals. Or perhaps we will never learn the truth. Perhaps Nibiru will forever remain a legend, the Anunnaki characters of myths, and our origins a mystery hidden in the darkness of time. But even so, the journey will have been worth it, because in asking these questions we learn something important about ourselves, our thirst for knowledge, our yearning toward the stars, our inability to be satisfied with simple answers. We are children of questions, not of answers. And as long as we keep asking, we remain alive, growing, evolving. We remain worthy of those who created us, whoever they may have been. And so we have reached the end of our journey through the mysteries of the Anunnaki and the secrets of Nibiru. We have traveled across millennia, from the clay tablets of Sumer to modern telescopes searching for a ninth planet. We have examined stones that carry traces of ancient builders, geological strata that tell of the catastrophes of the past, and myths that hold within them the memory of times when gods walked among men. We found no definitive answers because perhaps they do not exist, but we found questions worth asking and mysteries worth exploring. We found a reminder that the world is far more remarkable and complex than it seemed to us, and that our history may extend far further than what is written in the textbooks. If you enjoyed this nocturnal journey, if these reflections made you think or see the world a little differently, subscribe to our channel and leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this video with those who are ready to open their minds to unusual ideas, because together we can learn more than we can alone. And now, as the night stretches its starry canopy over the world, allow yourself to sink into sleep. May you dream of ancient cities bathed in the golden light of forgotten suns. May you dream of ships gliding between the stars. May you dream of answers to questions we have not yet learned to ask, because somewhere out there, in the infinity of the cosmos, or in the depths of our own memory, the truth is waiting for its moment, and one day, perhaps, we will be ready to receive it. Good night. And remember, sometimes the most ancient stories tell of the most distant future.